if supervisors are trained in a set way to give feedback, that gives them kind of a foundation. And so we can respond. If you get real upset with what I'm saying, I can listen to you and respond to that, but I'll get back to the protocol.
Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping human service organizations retain and grow their workforce using behavioral science. I am your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Today, you're going to hear strategies and insights from Dr. Dennis Reid. He's widely recognized as an expert on training supervisors, specifically in our field of IDD. He has published multiple books and multiple research articles. His work has earned awards from organizations such as the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the Organization for Autism Research, and the Association for Behavior Analysis International. That's just naming a few of them. Our conversation, I decided I'll split it into 2 episodes. This is part 1. In this part, he shares very practical insights on how to effectively train your direct support professionals and your frontline supervisors, what to do if a supervisor is struggling, how to prepare high potential DSPs right now so that they can hopefully become awesome supervisors in the future, and he covers a lot more than that as well. One other note, difference maker, if you stick around to the end, I'll share with you a free resource I created to help the frontline supervisors at your agency get better at managing people with 4 simple habits. You don't want to miss it. All right, let's get into the conversation. For anyone that's familiar with behavior skills training or evidence-based supervision practices, Dr. Reid, you are a legend, in my opinion, in this with a large body of work, published articles, books, but there could be potentially a listener who's not familiar with your work. So I was wondering if you could provide a brief synopsis of what you specialize in, and also maybe a little bit on why you got so passionate about it in the first place.
Well, as far as specializing, you kind of hit it. Using evidence-based means both applying them and evaluating them to train performance skills to staff, and then effectively supervising staff performance on the day-to-day job. How I got passionate about it, that's a long story. I'll give you the abbreviated version, cut me run off too much. Back in the dark ages when I was in graduate school, learning to become a human service professional, I was being trained to apply behavior analysis to work with people with severe disabilities. And for a little perspective, this was, I hate to admit it, but this was in the early 70s. And this was an exciting time in our field because up until that time, a lot of folks with severe disabilities didn't receive educational services. A lot of them didn't even go to schools. There's an actual special ed classification as untrainable. But in the early stages of behavior analysis, we were finding out by providing teaching procedures based on principles of learning, we were able to teach folks who prior to that were not considered teachable. And I was doing that, and it was very rewarding because we were seeing success. Then, long story short, I was given an opportunity to take a job in a large residential facility, a state institution, which at that time was where a lot of folks with severe disabilities resided. My job in that agency was to train staff how to apply teaching procedures and then supervise their performance of that to help individuals, become more independent and be in control of their lives. And this was a new thing in our society, frankly. It was right at the beginning of the normalization, deinstitutionalization movements. But I quickly learned that I didn't know much about training staff how to do this, much less supervising. And I got a lot of advice. Some of it was good, some of it was not very helpful. So began looking at what was available in the literature, still being a part-time graduate student, and trying to apply what we knew and then evaluating it. So we started both applying what we knew about staff training from an evidence-based perspective and conducting applied research to evaluate that, and then how to support staff from a supervisory perspective to do that well. And the passion came from finding out that, and you know, folks know this if they're in supervisory positions. I didn't realize it at the time, but by training staff to apply these effective procedures, we would see more progress with more individuals than when I was just working as a clinician. And that's the sweet part of supervision. I mean, you can impact more folks.
Yeah.
And then just kind of my own interest to be able to evaluate procedures through applied research and disseminate those. That was rewarding as well to hear from other people, see other people that they were applying procedures and having success. So I was hooked from a professional standpoint. It was rewarding, effortful, made a lot of mistakes along the way, but still rewarding.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about how when you're in a supervisor role, your impact does kind of get magnified, because if you can have a bunch of staff all doing a great job with what they're supposed to be doing, then the impact just can extend much beyond, far beyond what one person could do. So yeah, so kind of along the lines of this of supervisors, I was curious. It could be from your early days or more recently or whenever, but what's one of the more common skill deficits that you see in supervisors, and then how can whoever's the overseeing manager, what can they do to try to help supervisors overcome that skill deficit?
Well, let me try to answer that a little bit indirectly. I wouldn't call it a skill deficit, but I think the biggest obstacle of supervisors, certainly not all, but they don't spend enough time with their staff in the work site where the staff are providing services.
Hmm.
And, supervision, from our perspective, is a hands-on process. And to do it effectively, we have to know how well staff are doing. We have to give feedback on how they're doing to support their good performance, help them improve where necessary. And by being out and about and having face-to-face interactions, we can become much more participative. We get input from the staff, which is critical. And so I think that's the biggest obstacle I see. And, currently, with our remote supervision and remote training procedures, well, that's a whole nother set of issues. But as far as a skill deficit, I would say being able to give feedback effectively, to be able to see how well staff are doing and regularly give good positive feedback to support that, give feedback in a way that allows staff to have input, and be able to give feedback to improve performance when it needs to be improved.
Yeah. I'd like to dive into that for a moment with, if a supervisor's, can you give me a couple examples? If a supervisor is doing a great job, what would effective feedback look like?
Effective feedback, based on the research and application, would be we let folks know what they're doing well specifically, and express our approval. Needs to be sincere. We can't necessarily train supervisors how to be sincere, but I think most are. But they also have to come across sincerely to the staff. So, letting them know specifically what they did well, and expressing our commendation for that.
Okay, yeah. And then if they're trying to give some kind of, I don't know if the word would be corrective feedback, but they see something that's staff's doing that's not best practice. Maybe the staff is not providing enough attention, or not seeing, let's say they're not seeing a behavior as a form of communication. Oh, they're just acting up again. If they hear a staff saying something like that, what would good corrective feedback look like?
Well, let's say if we're going to give formal feedback, we see something that relatively serious and we need to correct it.
Okay.
So we try to do that privately with a staff person, pull them aside in the workstation, maybe have a meeting later, but pull them aside and we've researched and others have a protocol. We usually start our feedback sessions on a positive note. We try to let folks know something that they're doing well. Then we specify what they did well. Then we point out what is not going so well and specifically what they need to do differently. We ask for their input. Does it make sense? Do they have another view that we need to talk about? And then if we do it right, we let them know what we're going to do from here. Look, I'll come back and watch tomorrow, see how it's going, or I'll come back sometime next week. And then we try to finish up with something empathetic or positive. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, kind of just, I was just asking for, to get sort of the framework for how you would go about that. Yeah. When it comes to organizations preparing DSPs to become future leaders or working on kind of a leadership pipeline, what are some proactive things that you've seen in your experience that do that effectively to start to prepare DSPs of today to be supervisors of tomorrow?
Well, supervisors who are successful over the long run are usually keeping an eye out for staff who they can promote because, it's just one of the characteristics of our field is we have turnover among staff. We have turnover among supervisors, particularly supervisors of frontline staff. So always kind of looking for those folks who we think would be good at it. And then we try to involve them in the supervisory process that's going on. Let's say we're in a group home and we're having serious problems with absenteeism on second shift. We have a staff member in that home who think eventually might be in a supervisory role. As we're trying to figure out how we can reduce our absenteeism and what is it that's so displeasurable that staff don't want to come to work, but involve that staff person in those considerations and deciding what we're going to do. So they start seeing what the supervisory process is all about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there ways that organizations can try to build that in? I mean, a great supervisor may, I won't say naturally do that, but may kind of understand the value of it from their own learning history. But how can an organization that sees, hey, this would be really valuable, start to maybe build that into the way that their frontline supervisors operate? Any ideas on that one?
That's a really good question. I don't have a really good answer. I would qualify it in that, not everyone wants to hear this, but sometimes we'll have supervisors, and folks may even have said this about me as a supervisor. We're not sure those are the supervisors we want kind of mentoring staff to be supervisors. So how to build that in, again, it comes down to face-to-face contact. To try to do what you were asking about, I would see that on a structured basis. How often are you meeting with the supervisor, and what do y'all, or with the staff person? How are you? Are you giving them opportunities to give input or to critique what you as a supervisor are going to do and get their input? And I don't mean that the staff person is going to have the ultimate say. That still rests with the supervisor. But say like, okay, this is what I think we can do to reduce absenteeism. If you're the staff person, Nate, so what do you think? And go from there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I guess I'll just also throw out there that from what I've seen, and the more that whoever's managing the supervisors can bring that up repeatedly, not just a little box on a form, but can keep reminding them to be looking for future leaders. I think that can make a big impact as well. But
Good
certainly
point.
some frontline supervisors seem to get it, more than others, or they kind of immediately see the value of that, whereas others, that seems like that's much more of it's harder for them to maybe understand how valuable that can be. So I'm kind of searching for a story here of some kind. If you could, I'd love to know if you've seen any uh, turnarounds, or the more dramatic the better, but it doesn't have to be that dramatic. A lot of times things aren't that dramatic, but where you've seen either at an organizational level or an individual level where staff are not being managed well, and then things like there's probably going to be high turnover or low morale, these kinds of things. But then there was a turnaround, and whether you participated in this or whether you just observed this from a distance, or I mean, you may have been very hands-on, who knows? But what kinds of changes were made, or what was done differently? What created that turnaround? Because I know there's some organizations that are looking to turn some things around. So that's kind of why I'm getting at that.
I think the easiest way that I've experienced is you bring in a better supervisor. For example, for many, many years, one of the persons I supervised and collaborated with is Marsha Parsons, and she ran the adult day program for folks with disabilities. And she was just an excellent supervisor, did the things routinely that we've talked about. Was very pleasant in interactions and respectful with staff, but would still take a strong stand when need be. She was always out and about, seeing what's going on, giving feedback, getting input from staff. So I think if possible, to get a turnaround, bring in a better supervisor. That's not always possible, obviously, but that's what I've seen make the biggest difference most quickly, was a change in supervisor.
Okay. Yeah. No, that I can think of some examples myself of where just seeing a group home that's been struggling for 3 years, and then with a change in supervisor 6 months later, it's running completely differently. The vibe in the home, the individuals start to thrive a lot more, becomes more person-centered, all these kinds of things. So, yeah, I can see how valuable that is to make sure you have the right people in those spots and in those positions, who can really accomplish what the mission of the organization is. Changing gears just a little bit, behavior skills training is a concept that sometimes I talk about on the podcast, and me coming from more of a behavioral background, that's kind of a big deal. We'll get trained in that. But someone that's coming up in human services, maybe that's a newer concept, or those words don't mean much to them. I was wondering if you could describe behavior skills training and how organizations can use this to teach frontline staff and frontline supervisors.
Another good question. Behavioral skills training is very well established now as an effective way of teaching staff how to do certain job skills, how to perform what they're expected to perform. And very briefly, what it involves is, we explain when we're conducting behavioral skills training what it is specifically staff need to do. So say we're training new staff how to safely lift and transfer non-ambulatory individuals from their bed to the wheelchair, whatever. We describe the steps of how to do that. Then we give the steps in writing, so staff have a permanent job aid they can refer to and read right then. Then we show them how to do it. That, of course, assumes the supervisor knows how to do what he or she's training staff to do. After we show them, then we have them practice. And then we give feedback on how well they're doing, what they're doing well, what they need to do a little differently. And we keep doing that latter step when we do it right until we see them do it proficiently. And then the most important step, assuming we're doing that, say, during orientation or staff development classroom, The most important step, which is time consuming, is then we have to go out, or somebody does, and watch as staff apply their new skill and provide feedback as necessary to make sure that they can apply that skill during their daily routine. An underlying theme of behavioral skills training that's not always talked about is we don't know if we've done our job well as a trainer until we see staff do what we're teaching or training proficiently in the work site. Once we see that, we've trained well.
Okay. That can that be used to train, like we were talking about supervisors learning to give effective feedback? Can behavior skills training be used, or what would it look like for it to be used to teach a supervisor on giving feedback to their staff? So it's a skill that the supervisor is using towards staff more than just the, say, staff towards an individual being served.
We use the same procedures. We've done that for a number of years. We've researched it over time. It's a little cumbersome, but it's the same process. So initially, we'll meet with supervisors, go through the steps of behavioral skills training. We typically do that initially in a classroom type setting. We practice in a role play. So I usually have a co-trainer and say, okay, now Nate, I want you to apply the feedback protocol we just went over with Marcia, and I'll watch, and then I'll give feedback to you, and we'll keep doing that until you've got it down. Then it takes a little practice. And then when we do it right, we will go out and watch staff apply that feedback protocol or supervisor with their staff. And we'll tell the staff, look, Carol, I'm not here to watch you. I'm watching your boss. I want to see how it's going. And we do that until they're able to implement it appropriately. Like I said, it's a little cumbersome. And as you're well aware, sometimes we can expedite our training through video modeling. Where folks can watch and they get some of our training that way, but we still follow up on the job to make sure folks can do it. And with giving feedback, as I'm sure you're also well aware, the situations change because whomever you're giving feedback to can respond in various ways. Some people are very appreciative of it. Some people get defensive. Some people get downright hostile. Some people get really upset and feel real bad. So there's all those, I wouldn't call them soft skills on the part of the supervisor because they're too important to call soft, but to be able to respond to the situation. What we found, if supervisors are trained in a set way to give feedback, that gives them kind of a foundation. And so we can respond. If you get real upset with what I'm saying, I can listen to you and respond to that, but I'll get back to the protocol. Because at that point, the purpose is for the supervisor to help, either support what the staff are doing, hopefully reinforce it, or help them improve. So it's really the supervisor's agenda at that point to help the staff person, support the staff person.
Okay, yeah. And do you think that there's often a breakdown between maybe someone can role play it, but then it's different when you're on the field? I mean, when you're in the heat of the moment, because the role play person, they're going to probably more or less be cooperative versus then if you get out there and then what that must have hit a button on somebody, it triggered them. They're either, whether that's more from sadness or they're getting a little bit defensive or maybe angry or whatever. Is that a pretty big gap for people to overcome? I mean, obviously it's going to vary person to person, but just from what you've seen.
It can be. And like you said, it varies from person to person. And it depends on the relationship that supervisor already has with that staff person. Say like if you were a new supervisor, and I was training you to give feedback, I said, okay, we need to go out and practice this. I would try to arrange it so that you're going to give feedback to one of your staff who, we've already seen have a pretty good rapport, or we suspect that staff person is going to respond well, as opposed to, say, a staff person who's having performance problems, is already receiving disciplinary action. I wouldn't ask you to start with that person as part of the
Right.
training process.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You guys want to start with where the stakes are lower, or where there's a much better setup for success, to set the supervisor up for success. Um, yeah. So if an organization, let's suppose that the way that they train supervisors is they have people come in and share things, whether that's in-house, if they have an in-house trainer, or it could be videos, it could be what, bringing in guests, and it's mostly lecture, or maybe it's interactive, so it's not just completely sitting there and just taking it in with their ears, but there's no application element. But they hear this and they think about, well, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Why aren't we doing this? So if an organization, if they haven't really built this in, and they're like, they hear about behavior skills training, think this is great, they want to just run with it, what parts do you think they'd be most likely to have difficulty with, or possibly, I don't want to say mess up like they're screwing up, but I just mean, should they be looking for, that if this is kind of not really implemented for supervisors? Do you see what I don't know if I asked that clearly, but what should they be on the lookout for if they're trying to kind of turn over a new page by implementing behavior skills training?
That brings up a good issue again. First of all, let's qualify that meeting and lecturing, discussing. I mean, that's important. Depending on what we're trying to get across to staff. If we want to share the values of our agency, things like that, we talk through that. That's helpful. If we're trying to train staff how to do specific things on the job, which is what most affects client or consumer welfare, we need more of the behavioral skills training approach. The biggest problem I see when folks start doing it is the trainer does exactly what I'm doing now. They talk too much during training. Teaching people how to do things means having them practice and giving feedback. So biggest issue to be concerned about, I think, is when we start, say, implementing behavioral skills training, spend most time showing, practicing, giving feedback, less time talking. Trainers, like kind of what I'm doing now, we're maybe passionate about what we're trying to teach, but we learn by doing, we learn by seeing others do, and that's what the training should focus on. The biggest obstacle is the on-the-job criteria, meaning you sat through our training, now I need to come out and watch you do it and help support you to do it really well. That takes time on the part of the trainer. And that's one reason that a lot of agencies, even if folks in the agency know we should be doing behavioral skills training, it's just so time consuming to do the on-the-job part. So what we learned, because we work with or have worked with agencies that are spread around different counties. We have a group of people who do the on-the-job part of the training. And that's also, by the way, getting back to one of your earlier points, sometimes we'll bring in some of our frontline staff who we think may eventually, be in a supervisor role. And if they're interested, we train them how to do the on-the-job training component, and they help with that. And so they get experience doing that.
Just to clarify, would they be giving then like the feedback or the coaching to
yes.
So that's the role that they're doing? Yeah. Okay.
And you're aware of this. It sometimes it's called pyramidal training. We train several trainers who could then go out and train other folks. Sometimes called peer training if you have one staff person training the other. It can be effective if the folks who are going to be doing that training are well trained themselves. But it's important they're interested and willing in doing that. Some people don't want to be in a position of observing, giving feedback to their peers. And I understand that. So I think that's a critical part. If we're going to pull someone to help, we need to lay it out what it's going to be involved and see if they're interested in doing that or not.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So if a supervisor, or it could be even a higher level manager that's overseeing supervisors. But what would you say is the fastest way to tell the difference between a performance issue where it can be remedied by better training, or maybe the feedback process and feedback loop isn't very effective, versus a performance issue that it's probably going to be best if that person either changes roles or is not working in the organization? And again, not using like extreme examples. Sometimes it's, if someone's being abusive towards clients, I mean, this isn't a training issue. You're going to let that person go. But I
Right.
mean, someone that they kind of seem like they're trying, but there's some significant, gaps or whatever, those kinds of performance issues.
Yeah, I agree, because that in human services, a lot of times we let that slide. We have to respond to the very serious performance issues, abuse, neglect, take care of that right away. But sometimes we let slide when someone's just not teaching very well, or someone's just doesn't interact with our individuals very much. They'll spend more time sitting or doing data collect documentation. But to get back to your question, it also gets back to the importance of a supervisor being present frequently. So how well that person is performing or not. And I bring that up here because if we see someone, for example, teach very well in one situation, and then the next day they're not carrying out all the teaching procedures, that's usually a motivation problem. They have the skills to do it, but they don't do it consistently. Okay. Motivation issues have to be addressed a little bit different than lack of skill issues. The other thing is, if we've been observing and we've been giving feedback, and we've seen that the person can do it, but we're giving feedback on several occasions, but their performance isn't improving. Okay, that's a signal that this person really isn't working out, or what I'm doing with this person isn't working out. And we may need to look for another role of that person, either in our agency or help them out of the agency. Does
Okay.
that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, I originally had asked about the fastest way to tell the difference. It sounds like supervisors being present is a really big deal. I mean, I'm hearing that as a recurring theme, that they're observing and seeing what's happening and not just somewhere else. I mean, there's obviously other demands on their time, but, um, and then, yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying about the difference between a motivational issue, which maybe could be adjusted with putting some different, either more feedback or some other kind of contingencies in place, versus someone that's not picking up more basic skills. And it seems like not like their aptitude as a whole person isn't there, but for whatever, there's barriers that are stopping it from working in this setting for them to pick up vital skills.
Right. If they're trying but they can't get it, it's a performance deficit issue. And if we're unable to help them get it, so to speak, then generally, because they're trying, maybe we can make some adaptations in their expectations or reassign some expectations. The bigger concern is with someone who gets it, because we've seen them do it, but they just won't do it. And again, we usually approach that by increasing the amount of feedback we give. But when the feedback doesn't work, then we have to get into the disciplinary action route. It's not pleasant or enjoyable. If you do find giving disciplinary action enjoyable, I'm not sure you should be in a supervisor role, but we have to do it. So.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think, to use a football analogy, if you're working with, it's easy to root for a Rudy, but if you've got somebody that's just a Antonio Brown, that's a whole different story. But again, someone have to know football to catch that reference. But
I got
it. Okay. All right. I don't know about you, but I have so many takeaways from this conversation, Difference Maker. One of the things that I've been thinking about is how much Dr. Reid emphasized the importance of doing the real world observation and feedback, and how very often when it comes to staff training and especially supervisor training, that just doesn't happen. But then there is a cost. Think about how much time at your organization gets spent on putting out fires or dealing with preventable drama. I know this is the kind of stuff that I've seen over and over and over again. And if all of that, or at least the majority of that, could be stopped by doing training the right way, where you actually watch to see that your frontline supervisors, and of course your staff too, but that they can display the required skills for that position. In this case, things like giving feedback to their staff when it comes to supervisors, things along those lines. And I think that even though it's labor intensive to kind of do training the quote right way, that there actually is a savings in it for how much time and money gets sunk later if it's not done that way. So I'm still really wrestling with that. I could probably go on for a long time, but I don't want to. I want to give you a practical next step, an action move. Consider doing a mini audit of the training methods at your organization. You could look at the different components that Dr. Reid talked about. I think they were teach, model, observe, give feedback, and then do the observe and give feedback in the real world setting. Then if you looked at those 5 different components and then gave your organization a score for how well are you doing or how much is getting time and energy is getting spent on each one, that will probably kind of immediately, if you haven't already just by talking about it, been able to identify, it will help you identify which area do you need to strengthen most and probably where you should target it first. And as far as I'm concerned, identifying where the training breakdown is happening is already half the battle to solving it. Speaking of where to start, I have the resource I mentioned at the beginning, which is to help your frontline supervisors get better at managing people. It's a simple free PDF that describes 4 habits supervisors can do immediately to help strengthen the people skills and get better engagement and buy-in from those that work for them. You can get it at iddleader.com/supervisor. Well, come back next week or next episode to hear the second part of this interview where we go in depth on how to increase staff retention. Well, until next time, difference maker, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.